So, how does the vagal nerve turn up in our children? It's a funny question, that. But what I'm finding so interesting is that so many people understand or have heard of this idea of the vagal nerve. Now, when I first learned about vagal nerve over 2 decades ago, it was a pretty unusual thing and not many people knew about it. But the vagal nerve has become incredibly famous. And I want to talk a little bit more about how that shows up in our children and what that means. Now, the vagal nerve is actually the 10th cranial nerve. The cranial nerves exist within the cranium, and they tend to innervate predominantly things that we need to do with our head. So eyes, ears, mouth, chewing, all these sorts of things, swallowing. But the vagal nerve is a little bit different, because what happens is it exits the brain. It travels down either side of the spine, and it goes, it's called the Great Wanderer, and it goes down all the way to all of our major organs. And it's predominantly a sensory nerve. What that means is it's taking feedback from those organs, feeding it back to the brain, and then the brain has to decide what it needs to do next, what action it needs to take in order to ensure our body thrives. Now, it's feeding information predominantly, and I'm going to simplify this a whole lot, it's feeding information predominantly from our gut, our heart, our respiratory system, and it also has everything to do with this idea of our fight or flight response, or our rest, digest, and heal response. Okay, so we call the fight and flight response our sympathetic arm of the nerve system, and we call the rest, digest, and heal the parasympathetic side of our nerve system. Now, in order for our bodies to thrive, we need both of these in action, but in balance, right? And all too often, because of the lives that we lead in this busy world that we live in, we tend to have this sympathetic system really ramped up, and it therefore causes this parasympathetic system to be really toned down. So what tends to, and I'm generalizing here, when this situation is happening, we tend to be highly stressed. We tend to be very highly emotional, lowered emotional regulation. We tend to be very low on our digestion. So we have digestive issues. So think of children, we think constipation, bedwetting type things. We think of reflux in babies. We think of colic. I'm thinking of these as far as disorders that tend to turn up in our children. We have really lowered immune systems, so we tend to get recurrent colds, infections. We get sick all the time. We tend to have more illness in the body. Okay, so we have tantruming kids, we have screaming kids, we have sick kids, we have poor digestion. Now, obviously, we understand that in order for our kids to thrive, we need to bring that back into balance, okay? Because we need a system that responds if there's any kind of stress, but it should come out of response and get back into rest, digest, and healing. We can't heal well when we're in this situation. We can't respond in a way, we can't control our emotions appropriately when we're in this response. A child will be tantruming and upset and tearful and scared and anxious in this state. We tend to find that our bowels don't move properly. We tend to find that we have refluxy type children. So you can understand it's important to get this kind of balance. And all of this is coordinated through this vagus nerve. Okay, it's really interesting to me though, that's one nerve. Guess how many nerves we have in the body? Over 7 trillion. Yet we've got all this focus around one nerve. And I'm simplifying this dramatically. I want you really to understand that in order for us to have vibrant health, it has to work in harmony. Everything has to work in harmony. It's not just about one nerve. It's really about everything in the nerve system working in harmony. But we're talking about the cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve today. Now, what's really interesting is, why would the vagus nerve be in this situation? It tends to be in this situation because there may be something that's interfering with it, okay, or blocking it. And what we know, because of where it passes from the brain down through to the body, it's very closely connected with the movement, or it needs to have proper movement of the top of your neck, of the movement of the vertebra at the top of the neck. When we have good movement of those bones, that vagus nerve tends to be in a nice balanced state. When we have any kind of block of those areas, we call them subluxations, that really creates this state. It's so obvious to us as chiropractors. And so what we want to do is we want to bring that back into balance by keeping that neck moving really well. And it takes the pressure off that whole system. Now, what would cause the top of the neck in a child, a beautiful little child that's so perfect, to be subluxated or out of balance? What we find, and you know, it's common, right? So anyone who's ever given birth will understand this. Anyone who has participated in a birth or had their partner give birth will understand this. Birth is a highly physical act, and it doesn't matter what kind of birth you have, whether it's vaginal, whether it's cesarean, whether it's whether you have epidural, any kind of birth. It's a physical act, right? And there is a huge amount of pressure placed on the upper cervical, the top of the neck area in that baby, no matter how it's born, whether it's born by cesarean, born vaginally, had the ventouse used, had the forceps used. There is a lot of pressure on that baby's neck. And that alone is enough to cause subluxation at the top of a child's neck. And that could exist in that child for years before it becomes discovered, because the body will always try and accommodate and thrive. So it will try and do its best until at some point it's not going to do so well, and we will get a signal, a sign that things are not well. So we don't always get those symptoms straight away. They will often creep in. And just to demonstrate that, in a child who's had, even in a normal birth, but let's call it a traumatic birth, those symptoms, that reflux, that colic, often doesn't happen from day one. It takes a little bit of time because the body is trying to adapt, but it gets to a point where it can't anymore, and then it will give us really loud symptoms or signals. So they did a study. It was a long time ago, actually, and they looked at 100 different babies that were born. And these babies were all healthy and well. There was nothing wrong with them, but they examined all of them. What they discovered is that over 80% of them, without any symptoms at all, exhibited this area of dysfunction in the upper cervical region just from being born. So I'm giving you that as an example because it demonstrates that it's a really, really prevalent situation. So we always encourage any child that's born to be checked as soon as possible after birth. It's really, really important. It really makes such a big impact with the ability for that baby to be able to digest, latch, bond, regulate itself, and thrive. When there's subluxation in the system of the upper cervical region, we tend to have this situation. And we just don't want that in our children. We want our children to thrive from the get-go. So in summary, the vagus nerve is really pivotal with regards to whether it's ramped up or switched off. And we really want to ensure that nerve, along with all of our nerves and our nervous system, is in balance and harmony all the time. And the best way of doing that is to make sure that our spine is functioning well, so therefore our nervous system can be at ease. There are lots of other ways that we can help bring balance back to that vagus nerve if there's any kind of dysautonomia or imbalance in that. And one really good way is through breath. Another way is to explore nature. So to get out into nature really helps to regulate that. Singing, humming is another really good way of regulating that. There are lots of beautiful ways that we can help to stimulate that vagal tone. In a baby, when that baby is really ramped up, other than getting it checked, the other way is it will be really, that vagal tone will be very much brought back into balance when that mother has skin to skin with that baby, when the mother is regulating her breath, when the mother is regulating her vagal tone. That will then be transferred through to the baby as well. I really could talk for so much longer on this, but I think you get the gist of it, and we might pick up on this at a later date. But yeah, let's keep that vagus nerve in balance and let's help our children thrive.